In 1909, Carl Jung experienced a dream that would revolutionize our understanding of the human mind. He found himself descending through the floors of a house. The upper floor was elegant, furnished in Rococo style, representing his conscious mind. But as he descended, each level grew progressively older. The ground floor was medieval, the cellar was Roman, and beneath that, in a cave carved from rock, he discovered scattered bones and broken pottery dating back to prehistoric times. When Jung shared this dream with Sigmund Freud, his mentor expected him to identify some repressed personal memory. But Jung realized something far more profound. The house wasn't just his personal psyche. It was a map of the entire human mind, descending from individual consciousness down through layers of collective human experience stretching back millennia. This dream became the foundation of Jung's most revolutionary theory, the collective unconscious. Beneath our personal experiences and memories, Jung proposed, lies a deeper layer of the psyche that we inherit, not learn, containing the psychological patterns of our entire species. He called these patterns archetypes, and understanding them would unlock secrets about human nature that had been hidden for thousands of years. But Jung's proposal was met with fierce resistance. How could psychological patterns be inherited like eye color or height? Where was the mechanism? Critics dismissed the collective unconscious as mysticism masquerading as science. Jung spent the rest of his life gathering evidence from dreams, myths, religious symbols, art across cultures, and the spontaneous visions of his patients. What he discovered was staggering. Patients with no knowledge of ancient mythology spontaneously produced images identical to symbols from cultures they'd never encountered. Children drew mandalas before anyone taught them what sacred geometry was. People from radically different backgrounds dreamed the same archetypal figures: the wise old man, the great mother, the shadow, the hero. The evidence suggested something impossible yet undeniable. Humanity shares a psychological inheritance, a universal symbolic language.
The bridge, your invisible inheritance. If you've ever felt an immediate, inexplicable connection to a myth or story from a culture you've never studied, if certain symbols, circles, crosses, spirals move you in ways you can't articulate, if you've dreamed of figures or scenarios that feel ancient and universal rather than personal and specific, you're encountering the collective unconscious. You're accessing a layer of your psyche that doesn't belong to you alone, but to the entire human species. Most people go through life completely unaware that beneath their personal memories and learned experiences lies this vast repository of inherited psychological patterns. They encounter archetypes constantly, in films, books, dreams, relationships, but never recognize what they're experiencing. They feel the pull of the hero's journey or the allure of the anima without understanding that these aren't just storytelling devices. They're psychological structures as real and influential as your skeleton, shaping your thoughts, emotions, and behaviors in ways you never consciously chose. Jung discovered that these archetypal patterns aren't just interesting psychological curiosities. They're active forces in your psyche right now. They manifest in your dreams as recurring figures. They appear in your relationships as patterns you can't seem to break. They emerge during crises as spontaneous images that offer guidance, if you know how to read them. Understanding archetypes and the collective unconscious isn't academic knowledge. It's a practical framework for navigating the depths of your own psyche and accelerating the most important psychological work you'll ever undertake: individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. Archetype 1, the persona, the mask you wear. Before you can understand the deeper archetypes, you must first recognize the one you've been performing your entire life without realizing it. The persona. Jung used this term, borrowed from the Latin word for theatrical mask, to describe the social face you present to the world. It's not your authentic self. It's the constructed identity you've built to
meet social expectations, gain approval, and navigate the demands of collective life. The persona isn't inherently negative. It's psychologically necessary. You need a functional social identity to participate in society. The problem arises when you confuse the persona with your actual self. You begin to believe that the mask is your face. The roles you play, the professional, the parent, the partner, the friend, start to feel like the totality of who you are. And beneath the mask, your authentic self suffocates. Jung observed that many people experiencing midlife crises weren't facing external problems. They were facing the collapse of their persona. They'd spent decades building an identity based on external validation, social roles, and collective values. And suddenly, that identity felt hollow. The prestigious career felt meaningless. The perfect family image felt like a performance. They'd succeeded at being what others wanted them to be, and in the process, they'd lost who they actually were. Consider Sarah, a composite drawn from Jungian case studies. She was the perfect daughter, the successful lawyer, the devoted wife. Her persona was flawless. But at 38, she experienced what Jung called psychic invasion. Her dreams became violent and disturbing. She felt inexplicable rage at her seemingly perfect life. Her carefully constructed persona was cracking under the pressure of all the aspects of herself she'd repressed to maintain the acceptable social face. The shadow, everything she'd rejected as incompatible with her persona, was demanding integration. How to work with the persona? The first step in individuation is distinguishing between your persona and your authentic self. Ask yourself, which parts of how I present myself are genuine expressions of who I am, and which parts are performances designed to gain approval or avoid rejection? This isn't about abandoning social adaptation. It's about consciously choosing which social masks you wear rather than unconsciously identifying with them. Jung said that recognizing your persona is recognizing that you're more than the roles you play. But beneath the persona lies something far more,
the aspect of yourself you've been running from your entire life. Archetype 2, the shadow, integrating your darkness. Jung called the shadow the foundation for sexual and life instincts, but this dry description doesn't capture what encountering your shadow actually feels like. The shadow is everything about yourself that you've deemed unacceptable and exiled from conscious awareness. It's your rage, your selfishness, your sexual desires, your weakness, your cruelty, your neediness. Every quality that threatened your self-image or social acceptance, banished to the unconscious where it grows in the dark. The shadow is the archetype of the personal unconscious. While other archetypes belong to the collective human inheritance, your shadow is uniquely yours, formed by your specific experiences, culture, and what your family and society taught you was unacceptable. But here's what makes it archetypal. Every human being has a shadow. The universal human experience of rejecting parts of ourselves creates a universal psychological structure. Jung discovered that you can't see your own shadow directly. It remains unconscious, but it reveals itself through projection. You perceive it in others. The people who trigger intense negative reactions in you, they're mirrors showing you your own disowned qualities. That arrogant colleague you despise might be reflecting the confidence you've repressed. That manipulative friend who enrages you might be showing you the strategic thinking you've condemned in yourself. Your shadow doesn't disappear because you reject it. It operates autonomously, influencing your behavior in ways you don't recognize. Jung insisted that shadow integration is the apprentice piece in psychological development. You cannot progress to deeper work without it. The shadow, he wrote, must be confronted first. This doesn't mean acting out every dark impulse. It means acknowledging that you contain the full spectrum of human possibility, including the aspects you find shameful.
It means recognizing that your capacity for darkness is what makes you human, not what makes you defective. A powerful example comes from a patient who came to Jung horrified by violent fantasies. Rather than pathologizing these images, Jung helped him recognize that the psyche was compensating for his overly passive, people-pleasing conscious personality. The violent fantasies weren't predictions of future behavior. They were the shadow attempting to restore psychological balance by presenting the aggression he'd completely repressed. Once he acknowledged and integrated this energy consciously, learning to set boundaries and assert himself appropriately, the violent fantasies disappeared. How to integrate your shadow? Jung developed a technique he called active imagination for shadow work. When you feel intense negative emotion towards someone, pause. Ask, what quality in them am I rejecting? Could I possess this quality in a form I don't recognize? The resistance you feel to this question is proportional to how deeply the quality is buried in your shadow. Shadow work isn't comfortable, but it's essential. As Jung warned, if you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. But shadow integration only prepares you for what Jung called the masterpiece of psychological development, encountering the Anima or Animus. Archetype 3. The Anima and Animus, your inner opposite. In Jung's framework, every man carries within his psyche an unconscious feminine personality, the Anima, and every woman carries an unconscious masculine personality, the Animus. These aren't learned gender roles. They're archetypal structures inherited through our evolutionary history, representing the psychological qualities associated with the opposite sex. Understanding these archetypes is crucial because they profoundly influence your relationships, your creativity, and your capacity for psychological wholeness. The Anima represents the unconscious feminine qualities in men: receptivity, emotion, intuition, connection, and the capacity for relationship. Because these qualities are often devalued in masculine socialization, they get repressed into the unconscious, where they form the Anima figure. Similarly, the Animus represents unconscious masculine qualities in women: assertion, logic, action, independence, and the capacity for penetrating insight. When these qualities are rejected as unfeminine, they form the Animus. Jung discovered that the Anima and Animus don't remain passive. They possess tremendous power over your psychology. They appear in dreams as figures of the opposite sex. They influence how you perceive and relate to people of that sex. Most significantly, they're projected onto your romantic partners, which is why you fall in love. When someone embodies the qualities of your Anima or Animus, you experience them as magical, fascinating, completing, because they're reflecting back the unconscious parts of yourself. This explains the devastating disappointment many people experience in relationships. They project their Anima or Animus onto a partner, experience the projection as love, then slowly realize the person isn't actually who they imagined. The partner was just a screen for the unconscious archetype. Jung said the key to mature relationship is withdrawing these projections, recognizing that the qualities you're seeking in another person are actually parts of yourself that need integration. Consider Marcus, who repeatedly fell in love with creative, free-spirited women, then grew frustrated when they weren't organized or practical. Jung would recognize this pattern immediately. Marcus was projecting his repressed anima, his own creativity and spontaneity, onto these women. He was attracted to them because they embodied qualities he'd rejected in himself as impractical. But he couldn't sustain the relationships because he was seeking completion through another person rather than developing these qualities himself. Once he began creative pursuits and honored his own spontaneous impulses, his relationship patterns transformed. How to work with Anima Animus? Jung suggested that recognizing Anima Animus projections is the key to both personal development and relationship maturity. Pay attention to the qualities you find irresistibly attractive or intensely frustrating in the opposite sex. These reveal your unconscious Anima or Animus. Ask, what would it mean for me to develop this quality in myself? The Anima's voice appears as, moods, intuitions, and sudden emotional insights. The Animus's voice appears as strong opinions, judgments, and convictions. Learning to recognize these inner voices rather than projecting them onto others is what Jung called the masterpiece of psychological development. But all these archetypes ultimately serve a single purpose, guiding you toward the self, the archetype of wholeness. Archetype 4, the self, the archetype of wholeness. The self is Jung's most profound and difficult concept. It's not your ego, your personality, or your sense of I. It's the archetype that represents the totality of your psyche, conscious and unconscious, personal and collective, integrated into a unified whole. Jung called it the God image within, the psychological representation of completeness. Encountering the self is the ultimate goal of individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole. The self exists as a potential from birth, but most people never consciously encounter it. They live entirely identified with their ego and persona, never suspecting that these are merely small fragments of the total psyche. The self operates like a magnetic north, pulling you towards psychological completeness through dreams, synchronicities, and the inexplicable feeling that you're meant to become something more than you currently are. Jung observed that the self manifests symbolically through specific universal images: mandalas, circles, squares, quaternity, fourfold patterns, the divine child, and the wise old man. When these symbols appear in your dreams or capture your attention with peculiar intensity, the self is attempting to communicate. These aren't random images. They're the psyche's way of representing psychological wholeness in a form the conscious mind can perceive. The self guides the individuation process. It orchestrates the confrontation with the shadow, the encounter with the Anima/Animus, and the gradual integration of all the disparate parts of your psyche into a coherent whole. This isn't a comfortable process. Jung described it as a circumambulation of the self, a spiraling journey that repeatedly circles back to the same psychological territories at
deeper levels. Each time you return, you understand more, integrate more, become more of who you actually are. A woman named Anna exemplifies self-realization. For 40 years, she lived according to others' expectations: the dutiful daughter, the supportive wife, the selfless mother. Then her husband died, her children left home, and she found herself facing a terrifying question: who am I when I'm not performing these roles? She entered Jungian analysis and began the individuation process. She confronted her shadow, the ambition and selfishness she'd repressed. She integrated her animus, the capacity for decisive action she'd projected onto her husband. And gradually, through years of inner work, she encountered the self, not as a concept, but as a lived reality. She became, in Jung's language, individuated, uniquely herself, no longer defined by collective expectations or unconscious patterns. How to recognize the self? The self reveals itself through symbols of wholeness, circles, mandalas, sacred geometry. When these images appear in your dreams or meditation, pay attention. The self also manifests as the sense that your life has meaning beyond your personal desires, that you're serving something larger than your ego. Jung said that individuation feels like being lived by something rather than living. You become an instrument of your own wholeness. But the self doesn't exist in isolation. It's intimately connected to the other great archetypes that shape human experience. Archetype 5, the mother, the primal nurturer. The mother archetype is one of the most powerful and complex patterns in the collective unconscious. It's not your personal mother, though she certainly activates and influences this archetype.
It's the inherited psychological structure representing nourishment, protection, unconditional love, and the dark, devouring aspects of nature. Every human being, regardless of their personal maternal experience, carries this archetype as part of their psychological inheritance. Jung observed that the mother appears in dual form, the good mother and the terrible mother. The good mother embodies nurturance, comfort, and unconditional acceptance, the psychological space where growth is possible. She's represented in mythology as the Earth Mother, the Virgin Mary, the protective goddess. But the terrible mother embodies the devouring, possessive, suffocating aspects of maternal energy. She's the witch in fairy tales, the consuming sea, the mother who won't let her children individuate. This duality isn't moral, it's archetypal. The mother archetype contains both because nature itself contains both. Nature nurtures and sustains life, but it also consumes and destroys. The mother's womb is both the ultimate sanctuary and a space you must leave to become independent. Understanding this duality is crucial because unintegrated maternal complexes, patterns stemming from the mother archetype, create profound psychological difficulties. People with an overly positive mother complex remain psychologically infantile, unable to face life's challenges without seeking comfort and rescue. People with a negative mother complex struggle with trust, intimacy, and self-nurturance, perceiving the world as fundamentally hostile. Neither has integrated the full mother archetype. They're stuck in a partial, distorted relationship with this archetypal energy. Consider David, who at 35 still called his mother multiple times daily and couldn't make major decisions without her approval. This wasn't just unhealthy dependency on his personal mother. He was trapped in an unresolved relationship with the mother archetype itself. Through Jungian analysis, he learned to recognize when the mother archetype was operating in his psyche: the longing for comfort, the fear of autonomous action, the fantasy of perfect safety. As he integrated this archetype consciously, he could access the positive maternal energy, self-nurturance, compassion, without being consumed by the negative aspects: dependency, fear of independence. How to work with the mother archetype. Notice when you're unconsciously seeking mothering from the world: comfort, rescue, unconditional acceptance. This isn't wrong, but if it's unconscious, you're vulnerable to manipulation by people or situations that promise maternal qualities. Also notice when you're in the grip of the negative mother, feeling trapped, suffocated, or devoured by relationships or situations that should nurture you. The key is developing your own internal good mother, the capacity to nurture yourself while maintaining psychological independence. But the mother is balanced by an equally powerful archetype, the father. Archetype 6, the hero, the journey to transformation. The hero is perhaps the most recognizable archetype because it appears in every culture's mythology and every era's stories. But the hero isn't just a storytelling device. It's a psychological structure representing the journey from dependence to independence, from unconsciousness to consciousness, from potential to actualized self. When you're gripped by the hero archetype, you feel called to leave the familiar and embark on a quest that will transform you. Joseph Campbell, heavily influenced by Jung, mapped what he called the hero's journey, a universal pattern appearing across world mythology. The hero begins in the ordinary world, receives a call to adventure, initially refuses, meets a mentor, crosses the threshold into the unknown, faces trials and enemies, reaches the innermost cave where the supreme ordeal awaits, seizes the treasure, and returns home transformed. This isn't just ancient mythology, it's the psychological structure of transformation itself. Jung understood that the hero's journey is an external projection of an internal process. When ancient myths describe heroes descending into the underworld to retrieve lost treasures, they're symbolizing the descent into the unconscious to retrieve lost parts of the self. When they describe slaying dragons, they're depicting the confrontation with the shadow. When they describe rescuing the captive maiden, they're illustrating the liberation of the Anima from unconscious imprisonment. The hero's journey is a map of individuation. But here's what most people miss. The hero archetype can also trap you. Some people become addicted to the hero journey, constantly seeking new dragons to slay, new quests to undertake, never settling into the wholeness the journey is meant to produce. They're identified with the hero, rather than using the hero as a developmental stage. Others reject the hero entirely, remaining in the ordinary world, refusing the call to adventure, never undertaking the psychological work required for transformation. Both are incomplete relationships with this archetype. Lisa's story demonstrates the hero archetype operating in contemporary life. At 28, she felt a restless dissatisfaction with her safe, conventional life. This was the call to adventure. She initially refused, clinging to security. But the call intensified until she quit her corporate job to start a social enterprise. She faced trials, financial insecurity, others' judgment, encountered mentors, unexpected allies who appeared when needed, descended into her own underworld, depression and self-doubt, emerged with a treasure, clarity about her true values and purpose, and returned transformed. She hadn't just changed careers, she'd undergone a psychological death and rebirth. How to recognize the hero archetype? The hero activates when you feel called to leave your current situation, even if it's comfortable, because something deep inside knows you need to transform. This call might appear as dissatisfaction, restlessness, or the sense that you're meant for something more. The hero's journey requires leaving psychological safety, facing your fears, and returning transformed. If you're in the grip of this archetype, honor it, but remember the goal isn't endless adventure. It's returning home psychologically whole. But the hero isn't the only figure in the journey. Other archetypes appear as allies, enemies, and guides. Archetype 7, the wise old man, the guide in the depths. When the hero descends into the unconscious, when you undertake deep psychological work, another archetype typically appears, the wise old man, the archetype of guidance, knowledge, and meaning. In myths, he's the wizard, the sage, the mentor who provides the magical weapon or crucial knowledge the hero needs. In dreams, he appears as a teacher, a doctor, a priest, or simply an old man with penetrating eyes who knows exactly what you need to hear. The wise old man represents accumulated wisdom, both personal wisdom you've forgotten and collective wisdom inherited through the species. He embodies the principle of meaning, the capacity to perceive patterns and significance that the conscious ego cannot access. When you're lost in psychological confusion and suddenly receive a flash of insight that reframes everything, the wise old man archetype is operating. Jung himself often appeared as the wise old man in his patients' dreams after they'd been in analysis with him. But the archetype isn't Jung personally. Jung's person activated the archetypal structure already present in their psyche. The patients were encountering their own inner wisdom, projected onto Jung's image. This is crucial to understand. The wise old man isn't an external authority. He's your own deeper intelligence, speaking in symbolic form. The shadow side of this archetype is the Phoenix, the rigid, dogmatic, life-denying old man who uses wisdom to shut down growth rather than enable it. This is the voice that says, "You're too old to change. That's just how life is," or "Don't question tradition." When the wise old man becomes inflated or distorted, he becomes the inner critic masquerading as wisdom. Robert's experience illustrates this archetype powerfully. During a period of profound career confusion, he dreamed of an old man who led him to a library and pointed to a specific book. In the dream, he opened the book and found a single sentence that, upon waking, provided the insight that resolved his dilemma. This wasn't his conscious mind generating solutions. It was the wise old man archetype, his deeper psyche communicating through symbols. How to work with the wise old man? When you're facing confusion or crisis, pay attention to the figures who appear in your dreams offering guidance. The wise old man often speaks in paradoxes or symbolic language rather than direct advice. If you're drawn to study with a teacher or mentor, recognize that you're projecting this archetype onto them. Learn from them, but remember that the wisdom you seek ultimately resides within your own depths. The goal is to internalize the wise old man, to access your own inner guidance without needing external
authorities. Yet wisdom alone isn't enough. You must also encounter the playful, chaotic force that disrupts all rigid structures. The Trickster. Archetype 8. The Trickster. Chaos as teacher. The Trickster is perhaps the strangest and most misunderstood archetype. He's the rule breaker, the boundary crosser, the figure who operates outside conventional morality and social order. In mythology, he appears as Loki, Hermes, Coyote, Anansi, figures who deceive, play pranks, violate taboos, and somehow serve the evolution of consciousness through their chaos. The Trickster makes us uncomfortable because he represents everything civilized consciousness tries to exclude. Jung observed that the Trickster archetype embodies the principle of disorder necessary for psychological growth. When your life becomes too rigid, too controlled, too identified with your carefully constructed persona, the Trickster appears to disrupt it. He's the Freudian slip that reveals what you were trying to hide. He's the impulsive decision that upends your carefully laid plans but leads somewhere more authentic. He's the absurd coincidence that seems meaningless until you recognize the pattern. The Trickster operates through humor, irreverence, and the violation of boundaries. He reminds you that no psychological structure should become absolute. The moment you take yourself too seriously, the moment you believe you've achieved complete understanding or control, the Trickster will appear to humble you. This isn't cruelty, it's wisdom disguised as foolishness. Many people encounter the Trickster during psychological inflation, when the ego becomes identified with archetypal energy and loses its groundedness. The person who declares, "I've achieved enlightenment," will find the Trickster appearing in their life through humiliating situations that reveal they still have plenty of shadow. The therapist who believes they've mastered psychology will have their certainty shattered by a client whose complexity exceeds their understanding. The Trickster restores humility. Consider Elena, who spent years building a spiritual practice based on transcending the ego and achieving peace. She attended retreats, meditated daily, and cultivated an image of serenity. Then she fell wildly in love with someone completely inappropriate, an artist, reckless and irresponsible. Her carefully constructed spiritual persona collapsed. She felt like a fool. But this was the Trickster at work, disrupting her inflation and reconnecting her with the passionate, embodied, messy aspects of herself she'd been transcending. The relationship ended badly, but she emerged more human, more whole, more real. How to work with the Trickster? When life becomes chaotic or absurd, when your plans fall apart in ways that seem almost comically designed to humble you, consider that the Trickster archetype may be operating. Instead of fighting the chaos, ask what rigid structure in your psyche needs disruption. The Trickster teaches through destabilization. He appears when consciousness has become too one-sided and needs rebalancing. Don't try to control the Trickster, you can't. Learn to recognize his signature and find the wisdom hidden in the apparent foolishness. Integration, the archetypal navigation system. If you've begun recognizing these archetypes operating in your life, you're facing a choice that will determine whether this knowledge transforms you or simply becomes interesting concept you file away. Archetypes aren't theoretical constructs to study academically. They're living psychological forces active in your psyche right now, shaping your thoughts, emotions, relationships, and life trajectory in ways you haven't consciously chosen. The 12-month archetypal integration practice. Jung's process of individuation, becoming consciously who you already are unconsciously, requires systematic engagement with these archetypal forces.
Months 1 to 3. Persona work. Identify which social masks you wear. Create a persona map listing your various roles and the qualities you perform in each. Ask, which of these is authentic expression and which is performance designed to gain approval or avoid rejection? Begin consciously choosing when to wear the mask rather than unconsciously identifying with it. Months 4 to 6. Shadow integration. Practice the shadow recognition method. When someone triggers intense negative emotion, write down exactly what you're judging in them. Then ask, do I possess this quality in a form I don't recognize? Track patterns across 3 months. The qualities that appear repeatedly reveal your core shadow content. Months 7 to 9. Anima or Animus work. Examine your relationship patterns. What qualities do you consistently seek in partners? These reveal your projected anima or animus. Develop these qualities in yourself through creative practice, emotional expression, or whatever the projection represents. Notice how your attractions shift as you integrate what you were seeking externally. Months 10 to 12. Self-orientation. Begin a daily practice of engaging symbolic material. Record dreams, create mandalas, practice active imagination. Watch for symbols of wholeness, circles, quaternity, sacred geometry. These indicate the self is becoming more conscious. Ask, what wants to emerge through me that's larger than my ego's plans? Ethical warning. As you become conscious of archetypal forces, you'll gain significant psychological power. Jung warned against archetypal inflation, identifying with an archetype rather than recognizing it as an autonomous force you're relating to. If you begin thinking, I am the hero, or I am the wise old man, you've crossed from integration into possession. The goal isn't to become the archetypes. It's to recognize them, learn from them, and allow them to serve your individuation without dominating your consciousness. The transformational promise. Jung discovered that individuals who complete this archetypal integration work, who genuinely individuate rather than just intellectually understanding the concepts, undergo a transformation that affects every dimension of their lives. They develop what he called psychological objectivity, the ability to observe their own psyche without being overwhelmed by it. They access creativity from the collective unconscious rather than just recycling personal material. They form relationships based on genuine connection rather than projection. And most significantly, they find meaning that doesn't depend on external validation or achievement. They become, in themselves, uniquely individual yet connected to the universal. The closing. The House of the Psyche. In 1909, Carl Jung descended through the floors of a dream house, discovering that beneath his personal consciousness lay ancient, universal layers of the human psyche. That dream launched a lifetime of exploration into the depths of human nature, revealing that we inherit not just physical characteristics, but psychological patterns, archetypes that connect us to every human who has ever lived. These archetypes aren't abstract theory, they're active forces in your life right now. The persona you perform to navigate society, the shadow you project onto others, the anima or animus you seek in relationships, the self pulling you toward wholeness, the mother, father, hero, wise old man, and trickster appearing in your dreams and life situations, offering guidance if you know how to read their symbolic language. Jung spent his career demonstrating that consciousness isn't the totality of the psyche. It's a small island in a vast ocean of unconscious processes. Beneath your personal memories lies the collective unconscious, a universal psychological inheritance containing the accumulated wisdom and patterns of human experience stretching back to the origins of our species. You aren't just an isolated individual. You're a unique expression of universal psychological forces. The question isn't whether these archetypes are operating in your psyche. The question is, will you remain unconscious of them, allowing them to direct your life from the shadows? Or will you make them conscious, transforming from someone controlled by archetypal forces into someone who consciously engages with them? Jung called this process individuation, the journey from unconscious collective identity to conscious, authentic selfhood. It's not comfortable. It requires confronting your shadow, withdrawing your projections, releasing your identification with social roles, and undertaking the hero's journey into your own depths. But those who complete this journey discover something remarkable. They become connected to a source of meaning, wisdom, and creativity. Their personal limitations. They access the collective unconscious, not as a concept, but as a lived reality. The house of your psyche has many floors. Most people live only in the upper rooms, never suspecting the ancient chambers below. But the descent is available to you. The archetypes are waiting, and the self, your own deepest potential, is calling you home.